Welcome to The Flow, hosted by Bob Martin, slightly edgy glimpses into politics, culture, society, and being human.
Hey, welcome back to The Flow. I'm Bob Martin, and if you're new here, I'm glad you found us. The Flow is where we slow down long enough to actually think about what's happening in politics, culture, and in our lives as citizens. Not to score points, not to get outraged, but to actually understand because, in order to go with the flow, you first have to understand the flow. Today, we're starting a two-part conversation about something I think is genuinely urgent and genuinely underappreciated. We're talking about how Americans get their news, specifically how carefully constructed media ecosystems have shaped and, in some cases, replaced the way millions of people understand reality. We're going to talk about Fox News, not as a punchline, as a case study. And we're going to follow the road that runs past Fox and see where it leads. And we're going to talk about what was lost before any of this moved in to fill the silence. This is part one. Part two comes next Wednesday, and that's where we'll take on some harder questions, including some that, make people on my side of the aisle a little bit uncomfortable. But today, let's start with what actually happened. Before we get into it, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to hear your answers in the comments. So, where do you get your news? And when did you last stop to ask yourself why? And if your local newspaper has changed, shrunk, or disappeared in your lifetime, tell me what you remember about it. What did your community lose when it went? I read every comment. I mean that. So drop it below. And one more thing before we dive in. The flow is my way of giving back. I've been lucky in my life, lucky in my work, lucky in the people who shape me. And I have things I still want to say. So if you subscribe on the flow, every dollar after production expenses goes directly to Doctors Without Borders, World Central Kitchen, and Feeding America. You're not just joining a conversation. You're helping feed someone, heal someone, keep someone from going to bed hungry. So I hope that you can help support this ecosystem of independent reporting. I hope you'll consider it. All right, let's get into it. Let me tell you about two things I watched with my own eyes recently. The first was at the dog park. I was half listening to a conversation between two people nearby. One of them was explaining why they had stopped watching Fox News. Not because Fox had gotten too extreme, because Fox had gotten too soft. They had switched to something further right. I stored that away. The second was on my television just this past week. Trump's Great American State Fair was running on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and Fox News was covering it live. A host was describing the energy and enthusiasm on the grounds, and right there on the screen behind her was the National Mall itself, mostly empty, a handful of people scattered in the distance. The words and the picture were not telling the same story. I sat there and I thought, am I really watching this in real time? That's what this piece is about. Not Fox News as a punchline, not right-wing media as a boogeyman, but the actual architecture of how millions of Americans are receiving, filtering, and processing information, and what we lost that let something like this fill the silence. Look, in 2020, researchers at Berkeley and Yale ran a quiet experiment. They recruited 763 regular Fox News viewers and paid a randomly selected group $15 an hour to watch CNN instead of Fox during primetime for 4 weeks. Opinions shifted on COVID, on voting by mail, on Trump, on Biden. Modest changes, but real ones. And then the study ended and people went back to Fox and the changes faded. 4 weeks of different information, mostly erased. Now, sit with that one detail. That detail tells us everything about what we're actually dealing with. We tend to talk about Fox News as a channel with bias. I want to suggest that framing is too small. Fox News is a habitat. A habitat doesn't just provide a shelter. It creates a complete environment with its own logic, its own language, and its own immune system against outside intrusion. Spend enough time inside any habitat, and it stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like home. That's what Fox built, and it was built deliberately. Roger Ailes didn't come from journalism. He came from politics. He ran media strategy for Nixon, for Reagan, for the first President Bush. He understood that television wasn't primarily an information medium, it was an emotional one. It shaped identity. It built loyalty. It created belonging. What he built in 96 was not a news network with a conservative lean. It was a political instrument wearing the clothes of journalism. Now, here's where I want to be precise because this matters. The problem isn't bias. Every news organization has bias. The problem is something more specific. The business model at Fox is fear and outrage, not as a side effect, as the product. An audience that feels perpetually threatened and aggrieved is an audience that keeps watching, that drives ratings, that drives revenue. The disinformation isn't incidental to the business, it is the business. And we know this not just from the critics, we know it from Fox's own people. When the Dominion voting system lawsuit forced Fox into discovery, what came out wasn't a picture of a biased newsroom. It was a picture of hosts who privately knew the stolen election claims were false and broadcast them anyway. Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity texting each other their private disbelief while publicly amplifying the lie. Fox settled for $787 million rather than let discovery continued. $787 million. That's not a fine. That's a confession. And if you think that that pattern just belongs to 20, I want to remind you about what I saw on TV last week. Fox News host Sandra Smith told viewers there was a lot of energy at the state fair. Their camera behind her showed a mostly empty National Mall. On stage, Dr. Mehmet Oz described tons of people in attendance. A camera swiveled to show about 20 people watching. The Dominion lawsuit showed us what Fox does in private. The state fair showed us what Fox does in public, live, on camera. In the summer of 26, this pattern never stopped. It just kept running. But here's where it gets more alarming. Fox is no longer the end of the road. It's the beginning. Remember the person at the dog park who switched because Fox had gone soft? Well, where do you go when Fox isn't enough? Newsmax, which built its whole identity on never betraying the cause the way Fox did. OAN, further right, fewer guardrails. Breitbart, The Daily Wire, slickly produced, enormous reach with younger conservative men. The Epoch Times, funded by a religious movement most Americans have never heard of, and one of the biggest pro-Trump political advertisers on Facebook in 20. Real America's Voice, the home of Steve Bannon's War Room, and at the very far end of the road, InfoWars, where Alex Jones spent years telling grieving parents that their murdered children never existed. The production quality drops as you move down that list. The claims get wilder, the accountability disappears entirely, but the audience doesn't experience a drop in quality. They experience an increase in honesty. But none of this happened in a vacuum. And I mean that literally. Now, look, I was a columnist for the Burlington Times News, our local paper here in North Carolina. I had editors. I had people who pushed back when I got something wrong. I know from the inside what a real newsroom looks like, and I watched what happened to that paper. First, bought by a regional chain, then a national one. Each acquisition stripped something away. We went from a newsroom that covered the courts, the commissioners, the school board, the actual daily machinery of local democracy, to lifestyle content, then to one reporter without an office, then wire copy from somewhere else about somewhere else, then almost nothing. Burlington lost its eyes and ears. Nobody watching the commissioners, nobody in the courtroom, nobody at the school board meeting. And Burlington, unfortunately, is not unusual. America has lost roughly 2,500 local newspapers since '05, 2,500 communities now flying blind on the decisions that affect their daily lives most directly. And in that silence, something moved. People didn't stop needing to be informed. They didn't stop needing to feel like they understood what was happening. They just lost the source that had been doing that work, maybe imperfectly, but genuinely. And Fox was waiting. The whole ecosystem was waiting with a clear signal, a warm community, and a complete explanation for everything frightening in the world. We didn't just lose our newspapers. We lost something quietly essential to self-government, and we didn't notice it until it was gone and something much louder had already moved in. So next week, we're going to ask some harder questions. Is mainstream media actually better? What does journalism look like from the inside? And what can any of us actually do about any of this? But here's what I want you to hold on to until then. There is a way through this, but you can only find it once you understand the terrain you're walking in. I'll see you Monday for the Flow Calm Waters and next Wednesday for part 2. In the meantime, stay awake, stay aware, and stay engaged.